usual, welcome to another Drifter Ruby interview. I'm David Kimura, and today I'm interviewing a very special guest and friend, Riaz.
Okay.
Riaz, so how do you pronounce your last name? I want to make sure I'm not messing that up.
Yeah. It's Virani.
Okay. So tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you? Why are you famous? Where do you work? And what are some of the things that you do?
Sure. So, I've been a developer in the Atlanta area for a while. I currently work as the CTO of a company called Load Up Technologies. So we're kind of based out of the Brave Stadium area, and we do some interesting stuff. We're one of the nation's largest junk removal companies. So we sort of are the Uber for junk removal in terms of getting rid of people's stuff they don't want.
Awesome. And so they have a whole development team around just that company.
Yeah, yeah. So we build a bunch of software that essentially helps bridge for both our partner companies, which are like large sort of furniture companies, or especially the big bed in the box mattress companies, as well as retail customers, and all of the drivers out there across the entire nation. That like if you want to get rid of a treadmill or a couch, you put an order in with us, and we have all this sort of fancy software that lets us price things up front, et cetera, that a lot of our competitors don't have, especially because they're all franchised and you have to like call someone and then wait for them to come out and give you a quote. So we make it all a lot easier, and therefore our business is growing.
Awesome. And so today I had you on here to talk about Ruby meetups, or really just meetups in general. So this doesn't have to be specific to Ruby. And you are the organizer for the Atlanta Ruby Users Group. Can you tell us a little bit about the users group and just really your adventures in it?
Yeah, so I got involved with the group really when I started becoming a developer. I was sort of on the product management side for various technology stuff for many years, and I came to Atlanta, and the Ruby users group was really one of the first groups I started just attending, and the community was just super super friendly to younger developers and to people coming into Ruby, and meetups were a really good way for me to meet developers and get familiar, as well as sort of become more comfortable with the notion of being a developer. So after that, since I've been a regular attender, the previous organizer, Patrick Van Stee, he gave me sort of the keys to the castle when he decided he was going to do some remote work and do more travel. And I don't know the exact number of years, but it's been a few years, and I've been doing it. I think I've only missed a month or two in several years now of doing it.
Awesome. And so the reason why I wanted you to come on here today to talk about the meetups is because I think, and myself included in this, there's a lot that we take for granted. There's this meetup, we can just go on a website or Google to find our local Ruby's meetups or whatever our interest is. And then someone is there, they have, some pizza or some other kind of food, desserts. They have a presentation, a speaker. So is that stuff just kind of come magically? Or, I want your thoughts on,
Yeah.
what all is involved? Like, what are we taking for granted that we just don't realize when we come to one of these meetups?
Yeah, it's funny is when I first started doing it, it was definitely a decent amount of work, and I was asking myself those same questions. And I tried a bunch of things, I'd say, to figure out the right pattern. And now, really, it is fairly on autopilot, but maybe that's the way I feel because I've been doing it so long, and I figured out the ways to make it really, really time efficient. My wife has been kind of going through some of the same challenges because she became the organizer of the Atlanta React meetup recently and took over that. So I've been trying to give her the same advice of like, hey, like here's some patterns that make it really easy to manage and make it really easy to make it consistent that I sort of figured out over the years. So a couple of those are in terms of, let's say, sponsorship. There's two kinds of sponsors I found, and there's really a couple only needs you have. So the sponsors who are always really, really ready to offer you any sort of resource are going to be recruiters. In reality, they're going to be really helpful to you right when they need people in your language, and then they won't be helpful at all. Secondly, sometimes they're a little too aggressive because they think that their involvement is going to lead to them placing people, and it doesn't always do that, right? They're going to get exposure to people, but it doesn't just mean it's going to give them money. So I would say, I don't discourage recruiters from attending, but I don't really rely upon them as resources from a organization or financial perspective for the meetup. The other one that's really big is going to be companies, and I've actually found those to be far more reliable. So again, the things you need are going to be space, money for food, and also potentially resources to fly out speakers if you choose to do that. Companies who are really bought into a technology, like if your stack is Ruby and you're growing and you're not going to be able to instantly choose to refactor out of it, you have a pretty vested stake in connecting with that community, having your own engineers be exposed to that community over the long term. And so asking them to contribute in terms of providing a venue, a recurring venue, as well as financial resources in the form of like food, they seem to be really, really consistent. And so we've had more volunteers than we've had sort of space to accommodate those companies who want to volunteer.
Well, I guess that's a great problem to have. Personally, I think it would be the opposite, finding a venue and stuff like that. So, have you ever had an experience where someone said that they were not interested in sponsoring the Ruby meetup?
Yeah, essentially they just didn't come forward. I'd say for us, we've had financial sponsorship in the form of Mailchimp and Pardot over the years, and they would just write checks, and that's if we don't get anyone else to pay for food, that's who it is. But the larger companies, at least in my experience, the larger companies that are have a stake in using the language, if they're built into that, they've been a pretty easy sell, right? So any of the larger Ruby shops, if they're based in Atlanta, they've actually, the last time in the spring we had sort of an opening because our longtime sponsor, which is Pivotal Labs, they kind of wanted to take a break because they weren't using Ruby, and they were like, and also the employee who was sort of helping us with it, he was changing roles. So we were like, oh my God, we haven't had to do this for a couple of years. What are we going to do? We put out a call, and even just at the meetup, there was like 4 companies who were like literally fighting over each other to get my attention to say, no, we'll pay for food. We'll give you the space. We'll do all of it. And we then had a couple of them vying for which who would offer the most perks to our members, and we even got food and space and parking validation and a consistent venue for at least a year by the end of it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great success story, with running a meetup. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
I
on.
mean, one of the interesting things that I actually learned about that is, and this is a couple lessons learned. So there was a time where we did, before 2 years ago, change venues a lot because we were worried about appearing to be partial to a single sponsor, single venue. We found that dramatically actually reduced attendance because people, especially when they're coming in the evenings, if they have been to that place before, they know how to get in through the door, they know how to get up the elevator, whatever it is. Changing the venue into a new uncertain place, because not every member is going to come every month, actually got really negative feedback. Like we did sort of a private poll of our members, and they were like, no, I just want a place I know how to get to. And I don't really care if they're willing to sponsor the meetup and be consistent, they really preferred that. So it was a really interesting thing we learned. We're like, oh, okay, we should just find a single place to keep it instead of offering more variety.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I would agree with that sentiment as well. I wouldn't like changing venues always, especially because for me personally, it takes me a while or a distance to travel to a Ruby meetup.
Yep.
So, what are some of the other quote hidden costs with running a meetup? Because I know that for the Atlanta Ruby group specifically, their meetup is on meetup.com
Yeah.
to register or say that you're attending and stuff.
Yep.
So I think that meetup.com has a certain fee even for personal or small
Yeah.
events.
Yeah. Yeah. So Meetup charges $15 a month, and you pay in a 6-month installment. At least that's the general plan that we're on. That allows a user to be an organizer of a meetup of a certain size. So the way that we've been able to pay for that is, so when I took over, actually from years ago, we had financial sponsorships through a couple of local companies, and so there was several $1,000s and essentially a previous account that was like just a dedicated checking account. So it's not like a 501c, whatever the nonprofit designation is,
Mhm.
but a couple companies had written checks. And so I got transferred that, and I made another, like a separate checking account that just keeps the money for the Ruby meetup. And we've gotten a few other sponsorships since then. We haven't had one in the last year or two because we haven't had to use much of it, but that's the main thing that comes out of that account, is that debit card is tied to paying for Meetup, and we'd be able to pay for it for many, many years. A couple other Meetup organizers I've talked to have gotten, if they have sort of a central sponsor for the Meetup, for the venue, usually these companies that, putting $15 a month on their corporate card and, being listed as a sponsor, is pretty trivial to them. And but you can also ask for financial contributions to cover that. Outside of that, it's almost always going to be venue and food. Food is the biggest one, right? Venues
Mhm.
are fairly easy to come by as long as you're willing to work with larger companies because they love to have engineers come to their office space, right? It's a free recruiting marketing tool for them. Um, but if you don't give them the opportunity to do that and pay for the food, finding financial sponsorship for the food is usually where I find uh, myself and other meetup organizers have trouble because just saying, "Oh, your food was paid for by X," doesn't seem to give many people that much of an inclination, and it is hard to get companies to just write flat out checks to you because unless they're gonna put it on their card, there's a whole bunch of coordination hassle. And food is expensive. I mean, we end up paying if we're doing pizza, it's somewhere between $200 and $300 a month for our users. And if we want anything better than pizza, it's even more than that. If we want to do drinks, it's also on top of that. It adds up pretty quickly to not be an insignificant amount of money. So that's really I think the key is like try to find really a good patron for the meetup that's willing to make that easier because otherwise the hassle of you if you don't know who the sponsor is next and what I mean by also finding a sponsor make it a consistent sponsor if you don't want to do a whole bunch
Mhm.
of light work right like there's this company they're agreeing to do all of these things and for the most part like don't get in the way of the company letting the company do that in the appearance of like oh we're partial to this company. I just haven't found that to be a real actual problem in real life but the hassle of finding money for food, finding a new venue, and having to do that every month is an enormous time suck.
Mhm.
And people don't like it. They'd rather have it be consistent and just be there. And the more you package that stuff together, companies are more receptive to that to paying for that anyways. It's easier for them if they don't have to like if you're not having to hassle someone every month and find a new office manager who's willing to figure everything out. Well, how do we get people into the elevators after 6 or whatever?
Yeah,
If they're not used to
absolutely. Yeah, so do you have any advice if someone's wanting to start their own meetup? Do they need to have a website or is something like meetup.com sufficient?
I would recommend using meetup.com. If you so I think people are kind of used to looking on there, specifically developer groups. And I think outside of that, the exposure it gives you is just you just can't beat that. I mean, if you just started a website and tried to go market it yourself,
Mhm.
you're asking for a part-time job. And in effect, like most people may even ask you then if you have a meetup.com site. We had an actual website for years, and we had Google Analytics and we tracked it. It really wasn't very heavy traffic. In fact, we also found that almost everyone coming to the site was linking to it off the link off of meetup.com. So they got all the information they needed, and then we're linking to this other site that had largely the same information. I'm not saying don't do it if you don't want to, but I would invest in the Meetup platform. I think it's the largest of itself out there, and make that look nice. Like get a logo together, like take some time to make the banners nice and do all that stuff and set it up correctly. But I wouldn't really imagine there's much else you're going to do better on your own site unless you really have a specific reason.
Yeah, cool. And is there any advice that you would advise against or things that you would advise against someone doing if they're trying to organize a meetup?
So I think unless you're tied to, let's say, you're in a somewhat sized city or even a smaller sized city, and you're like, okay, I really want to meet up around this technology. It's a commonly used technology. You might have really quick success in terms of getting a decent enough group of members that and people who want to attend. But most likely, it's going to be a bit slower than that. And the main thing I've said is I've always found is don't be inconsistent. So we've had meetups in a course of given a year with 80 people and with 15, right? And I mean, we met the day after the 2016 election just because we always are in a certain part of the month, and we still held the meetup even though everyone is exhausted or happy or sad or whatever it was. So people respect consistency. I found, like if you start something and you're getting 10 people or 5 people, keep holding it because that's people want a relationship to the meetup. That you want people that are going to come consistently. So the main thing to avoid is don't be flaky. If you're going to do it and just say, I'm going to do it for a year and then evaluate whether I should continue investing the time after a year. Don't do it for a month because like Meetup is littered with meetups that meet inconsistently or meet for a few months and then never meet again and they always fail. So
Mhm. Yeah, that's great advice. I guess it's one of those field of dreams, if you build it, they will come kind of thing.
A
But
little bit, yeah,
if you tear down your field after, no one shows up, then it will never take off. So that's good
absolutely.
advice.
And don't like and have a reason for people to show up. There's a lot of groups out there that are really people don't know what to expect. They're just sort of pie in the sky, like, oh, we're a general technology meetup. And sometimes they get some members, but you'll get often a lot of people who are like, not to be derogatory, you'll get real estate agents and other network marketing people who are just trying to show up to sell stuff. Um,
Mhm.
so, we're a Ruby users meetup group. We do some web stuff. We have two meetups. We also have the hack night, and that's specifically like we describe what it is, why you're going, what it's for. We're not trying to be too we're not trying to give you a motivational speech in our description. It's here's a meetup for these kinds of things. Here's what we're going to do. Come if you want.
Awesome. Was there anything else that someone should know about organizing their own meetup or even just attending a meetup?
Yeah, I mean, if you're really interested in starting your, so if you're interested in attending, I get a lot of questions about people wondering if they should show up or if they'll be too junior or they'll be welcome if they're maybe more on the business side. I've never found a meetup organizer who seems to think you shouldn't come. So feel free to come if you want to start your own meetup. I would actually say that a lot of meetups, one, search to see if there's a meetup that's already out there that's a little bit of a zombie that has a bunch of members that's very related to what you want to do. Because I've had people who've seen a lot of success by taking one over because the organizer was getting a little busy, and that might be a great way to kind of get control of meetup that's already got a good membership. But alternatively, go volunteer to help out with a meetup. The organizers are always willing. It's all volunteer, and that way you get kind of the experience of a sort of flow of organizing that stuff, and therefore it's very easy to then start your own versus just starting from scratch.
Awesome. And do you have any other advice for attendees, like the do's or don't do's when visiting a meetup?
I would say the only thing to do is just to be mindful of the fact that like the organizers are volunteers and are just sort of doing this offhand. So, sometimes I get private messages of someone who's very angry about the location or pissed off about the speaker is gonna doesn't have slides that they want to send out beforehand. Like they think it's like a class where like they can demand X, Y. So it's very much like if you're on GitHub and you're working with open source, right? Like don't sit there angry because they didn't have the feature that you want or something. As long as you're respectful. But that's the only time I find that I've myself or other organizers seem to get very annoyed when people want to like demand our time. Like, oh, we should have more events more than just the one monthly. And like, well, then you organize it. So stuff like that. That's really about it.
Yep. And that's fair because I think, again, a lot of us who just simply attend meetups often forget that there's kind of a human behind the scenes organizing all of it or a team
Right.
of people, and that this is just in addition to everything
Yeah.
else that they have going on in life.
Yeah.
So, personally, for me to you, I appreciate your efforts that you put into it. And I hope others are very grateful and thankful as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just thought of one other note that I think I should mention. One of the most helpful things for me in my sort of career in terms of employment, and this is to all the people who maybe are junior or looking to switch jobs, I don't think that there's a better way to market yourself technically than to volunteer to give a talk at a meetup. And so the one thing I'd say is I get a lot of people who are nervous because they've been to the meetups and they've seen, the talks can vary in difficulty, but they just seem really nervous about volunteering. They think they have to be some sort of quoted professional at some or have given conference talks to come to meetup talk. Like I think it's sort of the opposite. Be really free about volunteering, and every organizer is always looking for talks, and it's a really good way to market yourself and to hone in your skills. And generally, if you actually go to the meetups, you'll see the audience is pretty okay with you saying I don't know. I mean, it's sort of a more familiar community sort of setup than a large conference where you're going to look bad if you don't have an answer. So volunteer to give
Yep.
talks. It'll help you a lot.
Awesome. Well, Riaz, if people want to find you online or if they want to follow you on Twitter or something, where should they go?
So I'm maybe one of the few people that's not really heavy on Twitter. Probably the best place to find me is my blog that I post periodically on, which is pennyforyourcode.com. And alternatively, if you're in the Atlanta area, I'm fairly active on the Tech 404 Slack channel, so it's really easy to find me there. and or I guess email me. But if you want to follow my stuff, it's mainly going to be on the blog.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be sure to put a link to that in the show notes.
Yep,
Well, Riaz, I really appreciate you coming and talking to me today on the organizing a meetup.
sure.
It's a lot of great information.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Yep.
Bye. For more videos, check out driftingruby.com.